Hello, everyone, and welcome back to chapter 35, part 2. So, in part 1, we discussed a lot about the different types of tissues that exist actually in plants and how they are differentiated from these apical meristems. And specifically, there's these three types of meristems that basically I will go just a bit over because they are so important, which is the protoderm, the procambium, and the gram meristem. Because the protoderm gives off the epidermis, the procambium gives the vascular tissue, which is the xylem and the phloem, and then you have the gram meristem that actually differentiates into the gram tissue. So we really went into a lot of details, basically, in part 1. So in part 2, what we will be talking about is mostly about the organs, because now we spoke about tissues. So organs are literally a collection of tissues that work together. So now the final thing that we actually have to go through a plant. So now we know the cells, the type of cells, the meristems, how they give the tissue. Now we need to look into more the organ systems. And in plants, there's three main types of organs: the roots, the stems, and the leaves. So I'll start off with the roots. So the roots are basically these kind of organs that are found, beneath the soil. And, in plants, they usually actually have this following certain structure, which, they are made of the three main layers, as we all know them, basically the epidermis, the the ground, and the vascular. So those are the three main types of layers that they're actually made of. So if you actually have a look at them, there's four main zones, and these zones are divided based on basically the type of cells that there is. So if you take a look at the first zone, it's the root cap. Then you have basically the zone of cell division, the zone of elongation, and the zone of maturation. In the root cap, if you guys remember, this is the area where it's protecting the apical meristems. So they basically contain all the meristems in here, and they start dividing. So then you create this kind of zone of cell division where these guys are just dividing, and then they hit the zone of elongation. And this zone of elongation is when the cells have divided, but they're very, very small. So what happens in this zone is that they start to elongate. And how they elongate is based on their vacuoles. Because vacuoles, as I was telling you before, they're the ones that give structure to the cell, and they really can actually, either make the cell go smaller or bigger based on the vacuole. Then they basically hit the zone of maturation. So here basically is when they actually have been specialized to become whatever they will become. So for example, like the protoderm will keep dividing until they form the epidermis cells, for example. Or in the case of the gram cells, will become parenchyma, collenchyma, or whatnot, or the kinds of basically, the vascular tissues, will they become the phloem, or will they become the xylem? This is basically what happens here in the zone of maturation. So I'm going to talk a bit more into details about the root cap because this is a very important structure. Because you guys remember, this is the structure that really protects the meristems, the apical meristems, and it's actually composed of two types of cells: the columella cells and the root cap cells. The columella cells are actually found in the inner side, and inner because basically they're inside, and they're called columella because they look like columns, and these are very important in giving structure. Same like at the root cap cells, they really help give structure and also give a lot of kind of protection for the sensitive tissue that's found inside actually here. It's very important. So one thing that Kumela cells actually are very important for is the sensation or the perception of gravity. Because if you remove these cells using a laser, actually, the plant doesn't have any more gravity orientation and can actually drop. So these Kumela cells are extremely important for that. So this is basically how this area looks like, the zone of maturation, and where now you basically these cells have actually kind of matured. So you have now the phloem, the xylem, the endoderm, and the cortex, which basically is made of the epidermis, and then basically the pericycle, which is mostly in the ground tissue. So this is just a graph representative. So if you guys see in your chapter, you get to see there's just a lot of much more details that I'm skipping through, and I'm skipping this on purpose because again, this is a reduced chapter. So only focus on the things I'm saying. So this kind of slide, forget about it. Focus on this side, like the sides that we're talking about, like this and this, but this, forget about it. So now let's go into different forms of roots that can exist. You have two types, the taproot system and the fibrous root system. The taproot system, basically, what it is that you have one main large root, which is shown here, and it's branched. Then you have the fibrous root, where you don't have one main, root. It's actually just many small roots with some very small diameters, as you clearly can see here. So trees can have, basically, sorry, plants can have either the tap root or the fibrous root, depends, what they have. However, some roots will grow, not here. Some other roots will actually grow in the stem. So let's go back into how, the cell looks like. Sorry, the plant looks like. If we go back here, so you have basically here's the main roots. These are the ones that either can be tap or the fibrous roots. However, roots can actually grow in the stem, which is basically this main stalk over here. This is quite interesting, actually. So let me go back. So these are called actually, advantageous roots. These are modified roots that have very specific functions, and they grow actually, they grow along the stem or in some other place other than the main root here. So these are the advantageous roots. They're not the main type of roots. They're actually found outside of these roots, and most of them are in the stems. And these can give a specific actually, function or kind of like advantageous to the plants. An example of this is, for example, trees that actually have roots growing from the stems, and they actually kind of give more support. It kind of makes them much more firmer in the soil. You have sometimes also plants that have, advantageous roots that kind of, also grow from the stem and they attach to other plants. So these can help plants to attach to other objects, not just to the soil. And these plants can actually, kind of steal a bit of the water from inside the plant they're actually attached to. So these are advantageous roots. So these are roots that are literally, they grow away from the main root and then give it a certain advantage. So now let's go into stems, which is the second organ that I want to go into. So the stem, so as I was saying, is basically the main body from the shoot. And the stems basically, as we all know, has this, the shoot apical meristems in the shoot apex. So the shoot apex is basically, where all the growth is happening because they have the apical meristem. And there is basically where all the growth starts. And, the first thing that comes out, actually, when the growth is this called this primordium. And this primordium actually is what gives, these are the early cells that will actually might can become into leaves. They can either be develop into the whole stem by itself, or can actually give, into leaves. So let's go into the external stem structure. So the stem, as I was saying, you have the terminal bud. This is basically the shoot apex. This is where all you basically you have all of the growing happening because it has all the apical meristems. So you basically have the primordium, and the primordium will start to actually grow into this big, massive, nice kind of like kind of stem, or basically into these kind of leaves. So then you basically have here as well the node, and the node is basically the point of attachment between a leaf and a stem. So this is the stem. Then you have basically the leaf. Actually, so the node would be basically right here. So it's just the point of attachment. The internode is basically the area between one node and the other. Then the blade is the flattened part of the leaf, basically. The petiole is the stalk of the leaf. So basically, this guy over here that's helping it to attach the leaf to the stem. Then you have the axillary bud. The axillary bud is the thing that we spoke about. These basically actually, you know, have apical meristems in them. And what happens is that when this guy over here, when you cut, the whole stem and you cut the terminal bud or the apical kind of apex, this can actually, take over because it has the apical stems and regrow the whole stem again. So these are basically, one thing I want you guys to know are, these kind of structures. So to tell you what, if I tell you what's the petiole, it's the stalk of the leaf. If I tell you what the blade is or what the axle is, this is these things I would like you to know. Oh yeah, by the way, axle is just the angle between this whole petiole and the stem. So this would become the axle. So it's just literally the angle between them. And this axle is very important because some cells, this axle is very common to certain cells. For example, some cells have this axle of 137 degrees or 131.5 degrees actually. and that's a very specific kind of axle for certain leaves, and there's a reason behind it, but it's not really well known. So now let's go into the leaves. The leaves are the last organ that I want to go into. And these, as I was saying, are basically initiated as the primordial and the apical meristems. So basically, you have the stems here. This is the shoot, the apical meristems, and you basically get this primordial. And this primordial basically will this tissue will give off, the leaf. So the leaf is basically the main part of photosynthesis. It's the principal site of photosynthesis. As you know, it makes a lot of sense because these are the leaves that will be exposed to sunlight. So they need this. And they basically will keep growing and growing, and there's gonna be a lot of cell division until you hit maturity. Meaning that once all cells, are mature, basically, the growth stops. And they actually have different patterns. As we know, when you go into forest, you're going to see different types of leaves, and this is all because of certain the environments they live off. It's because they're going to, of course, evolution has made them give a certain structure to help them with their function and adapt towards the environment they live off. And we'll be going through a bit of examples there. So let's first look at the leaf epidermis. We actually took this in part one, but I'll be going more in details about it. So I will actually go into here. So if you have a look at the leaf has, the first thing that you have is the epidermis. So you have one layer, the upper epidermis, and the second layer, which is the lower epidermis. And then the epidermis, as we all know, it actually secretes kind of this kind of waxy cuticle, which is this cutin that gives this waxy kind of um, feeling to the leaf. And these epidermal cells do not have any chloroplasts. So nothing actually happens there. No um, photosynthesis occurs there. It's actually inside that the photosynthesis happens. But we also know that in the epidermis cells, basically they have these kind of guard cells that kind of help the stoma to open up and not. So we took, we actually had a lot of practice about the guard cells, and we knew what they are. So they kind of help. The most important thing is they help the stoma to open up, and this actually allows kind of the oxygen and carbon dioxide kind of exchange to occur. But it also helps the diffusion of water vapor. So this is where a lot of water and a lot of basically oxygen and CO2 is able to diffuse back and forth. So that's the very important thing of these epidermis. But then in the epidermis, as we know, basically you have, of course, inside the leaf, you have basically kind of the veins, which are either the xylem or the phloem. But in between them, you have a very nice, actually, kind of tissues, which are these basically mesophils. So the mesophyll is the tissue that's in between the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis, and it's basically kind of sandwiching kind of the veins. So in eudicots, so these are a specific type of leaves. So there's main two types, eudicots and monocots. In eudicots, you have two types. You have the palisade mesophyll and the spongy mesophyll. The palisade mesophyll are basically, are usually you can find them in two rows and very tightly packed. And they actually have this parenchyma cells. Parenchyma cells are literally parenchyma cells, which are super rich in chloroplasts. And that's where the photosynthesis occurs. Then you have a second layer, which is the spongy mesophyll, and these are loosely arranged cells that have many air spaces. And the biggest thing that they actually help here is they literally help a lot the gas exchange and water vapor exit. So that's why they're mostly actually found next to the guard cells because they really help a lot this kind of gas exchange and whatnot. So this is in eudicot. In monocot, you don't have this. The mesophyll is not differentiated into any palisade or spongy shell. You just have basically mesophyll cells. There are basically a lot helping. They're creating a lot, kind of, let's say, this photosynthesis and gas exchange. And then you don't have any of these palisade or spongy mesophils. So now coming to the last part, which is the modified leaves. The modified leaves, as we know, you can actually have many different types of leaves. And an example are these kind of floral leaves, which are called bracts. These are actually surround the flower. They're not the true flower, they're still leaves, but they behave like showy petals of the flower. And most of this can basically, advantageous point of view is they can actually make the flower more attractive for basically pollen. So that's one advantage you can get there. Some leaves, for example, as we know, like cactuses, have spines. So they actually reduce water loss and also help in pushing off predators away. Some other leaves have this reproductive kind of things called plantlets. So they're basically small little kind of things in the leaves that once they fall off, they're able to actually grow a whole full-size plant. And this is very important where this in certain plants where actually pollen is actually might not be a possibility, because the bees are not found there. So sorry guys, give me 1 second. My laptop's going crazy. So these are the modified leaves. And then you have the window leaves. So these are basically literally cone-shaped leaves that help photosynthesis can occur underground. Because of this cone, they increase the surface area and they help certain leaves that are mostly found underground to be self photosynthesis. Because if they're underground, they're not going to be exposed to a lot of sunlight. So you want to increase that surface areas a bit more. So they have this kind of cone shape. Then the last ones are basically the shade leaves or insectivorous leaves. So the shade leaves are basically these kind of have these leaves are quite massive in surface area, and these basically really help a lot in increasing kind of let's say photosynthesis. And then you have insectorious leaves. So these are basically ones that help kind of trap insects. So these are very important because of course they kind of prevent insects from sometimes deploying in there, or it can be actually a source of food for them. So those are the main organs. So guys, this whole chapter has been really reduced a lot. We've only given you the very simple things from this chapter. So these are the very main things that I really sorry. So basically here, these are the main things that I want you guys to really focus on, okay? So we have a vascular plant body, right? And we know that the vascular plant body consists of two things: the roots, which are found here, and the shoots. And basically, growth happens at meristems. Meristems are the ones that are basically helping growth to happen, and they happen actually either basically at the shoot apex or the root apex. Great. And these meristems generate tissues, and the tissues then of course make their organs, like the leaves, the stems, and the roots that we were just talking about. And we know that tissues are either dermal, ground, or vascular. So they can be categorized into three different types: dermal, ground, or vascular. So now, so now basically these are what we're talking about. So vascular consists of roots, shoots, and they grow at the apical meristems. Great. So now basically these apical meristems are divided into two things: the shoot apical meristem and the root apical meristem. So the shoot apical meristem produces the stems and the leaves, because those are the ones that are actually found in the shoot. Stems provide both, the primary growth and support and secondary growth. Leaves are the site of where the gas exchange and photosynthesis occur. So then basically we have here the root apical meristem. The root apical meristem produces, the roots. And the biggest thing that you can actually have from roots is that they absorb water and solutes, and they also actually, help the anchor the plant to the soil. However, we also know that some roots have a different, a bit an advantageous kind of, let's say, roots, and these are modified roots, which can be advantageous roots. These roots grow outside of the main root. They can grow actually in the stems, so they can actually be found more here. So remember that. So the apical meristems, these are the ones that are basically are creating all of these kind of structures. They have three main types: the protoderm, the procambium, and the ground mesoderm. The protoderm forms the epidermal tissue, which then forms, which actually has the guard cells, the trichomes, and the root hairs that we spoke about. Then in the procambium, you have the vascular tissue, which then basically includes the xylem and the phloem. The xylem is basically for water, and the phloem is actually for, quite big molecules like glucose and other ions and actually hormones and amino acids. Then you have the ground mesoderm, which gives you basically the ground tissue, which is the parenchyma, which is these are the cells that have all the chloroplasts, or basically other kind of cells that have more in the structure, which is the collenchyma and the sclerenchyma, and they give a lot of the very kind of firm structures. Then you have basically the lateral merisderms. So the lateral merisderms, as we said, these are the ones that actually help to grow in the second growth. These are the ones that help more in diameter. And these actually give the core cambium and the vascular cambium. So these are the main things that I guys want you to know. If you guys actually really know these really and well, and for example, what every single, if you basically know, guys know this quite well, and you know, for example, what guard cells are, trichomes, root hairs, and these kind of stuff, you're ready. You're ready for this section. So use this as the guide. And please, then on Friday, let's have a discussion about this. Let's all talk here about these kind of things, okay?